A lot of people credit me and this channel for the work that we've done to dismantle TYT. I've heard a lot of people say that I am part of the architects of their demise. But in reality, me nor Devin Tracy, who by the way still makes Young Turks videos, they're still fantastic. He's over on patreon.com/atheism. Go subscribe to him. He's finishing the Central Park series, re-releasing it in its entirety. It's absolutely amazing. You can access all of his videos. He is not gone. Anybody who tells you about his demise is greatly exaggerating, but even he is not the one behind the demise. Sure, we pointed it out. Sure, we showed you guys point by point how unhinged they are, how wrong they are. We went through their videos, we've dismantled them, but in reality, the left wing is a bigger contributor to the Young Turks' demise than anything else. And this is because me and Devin and other people who make responses to TYT that are considered more on the right of TYT are not pulling from the same audience. We're getting people that don't like the Young Turks. We're getting people who love laughing at Anna Kasparian and Cenk and their freakouts. We're not getting people from their own base. So when the left wing started turning on them, that's when you started to notice the cracks really form. That's when you started to notice Cenk become more and more unhinged, because now they're sharing content related to his meltdowns, and it's absolutely hilarious. And a perfect example of this is a video that was surfaced by Nuance Bro, and we need to give credit to Nuance Bro for clipping this, because I just spent like 30 minutes trying to find the original version of the video, because the Young Turks removed it from their app, this portion that we're looking for, and it's been really difficult. But he sniped this from the live stream, posted it online, and then it started getting shared not just by the right wing, but by the left wing. So credit where credit is due to Nuance Bro for doing so, and this video is absolutely devastating, and we're going to talk about it, but we got a sponsor. We're going to go to the sponsor, then we'll catch you on the other side, and then we'll get into it. Countless people in this nation struggle with weight loss, and one of the reasons why is because your body's working against you. Every single decade, your metabolism slows down by about 4%. So you might be asking yourself, how does one counter this genetic pitfall when it comes to weight loss as we get older? And the answer that I found, the answer that I recommend, is Keto with Justice. This amazing keto powder works by elevating the number of ketones in your body, thus prolonging a fat-burning state known as ketosis, and thousands of Americans have tried this, and it has aided their weight management goals. And just for you guys out there in the audience, because you're clicking on my affiliate link in the pinned comment and in the description, ketowithjustice.com, you can get 51% off this powder, 60-day money-back guarantee. Try it, love it, lose your weight, feel better about yourself. ketowithjustice.com.
RK says, as a trans queer person, I'm afraid to walk out my door daily because of people like Joe Rogan. By the way, if you're the trans person or several people that slept with Joe Rogan, can you let us know? Because it's obvious that it's personal for him. Okay, Joe, you slept with a person like that. There's nothing wrong with it. Get over it. Get over it. Get over it, Joe. It's super obvious that you're super into trans people. And you're taking it out, your hatred of yourself, on them, and you're making their life dangerous.
So that clip was Cenk Uygur demanding that the trans person that Joe Rogan slept with and he's weirded out by, or the trans people that Joe Rogan slept with and is weirded out by, come forward to the public so we can shame Joe Rogan in his weird blackmail attempt. Of course, this calls back memories of Anna Kasparian trying to blackmail Jimmy Dore unsuccessfully, and this one is also unsuccessful for a multitude of reasons. Number one, Joe Rogan doesn't hate trans people. Joe Rogan has talked consistently about his support for people who go through the transition. The only thing that Joe Rogan has been bothered by is those situations where it's clearly and obviously a problem to have biological males in female spaces, and that's what's really aggravating the Young Turks and everybody on the left wing. A perfect example of this is sports, combat sports in particular, because Joe Rogan is a big MMA guy.
And Joe, by the way, you want to be a man? You know, you're like, MMA. I don't like trans people because I'm so manly.
So when somebody who is biologically male, aka Fallon Fox, transitions to a woman after age 30 and starts beating up women in front of Joe Rogan in his sport, he knows that there's something off about this. He knows that there's something wrong with this, because obviously you have advantages as a biological male in the sporting world.
MMA!
Now, the same thing could be said for Leah Thomas, the middle-of-the-rung male trans swimmer who transitioned to a female and then started dominating college NCAA swimming, and a bunch of other athletes that just create a bunch of problems that Joe Rogan is too honest to ignore. But the Young Turks love ignoring that. The Young Turks love pretending that maybe, somebody who claims to be a woman but is actually a male transitioning and then going into a female prison and then assaulting people is a problem. Isn't a problem. But of course, TYT will definitely ignore it. Now, this video clip actually comes after the break, after a segment that they did about Joe Rogan, where they claim Joe Rogan is a groomer because Joe Rogan is angry at people who are more concerned about the right wing on Twitter using the phrase groomer, which, by the way, they do tend to overuse it at times. Not all the time, but at times they tend to overuse it. Than the actual problems going on with the children in our schools and the grooming related problems. So Joe Rogan spoke about that, he talked about that, and the Young Turks tried to disassemble his arguments and were completely unsuccessful in doing so. And then, of course, because they like to try to flip right-wing terms and use them against them, they started calling Joe Rogan a groomer.
I mean, if I could recall correctly, Cenk, in terms of systematically abusing children, a lot of that happened on the right wing with, the Catholic Church.
Yep.
Stuff like that.
Now, there's a lot of garbage in here, a lot of utter trash that honestly I'm not going to re-air on my channel because unlike the Young Turks, I can get monetized and I might get a community guideline strike if I were to play the things that they're saying that is fully monetized. Again, this is an organization that is connected with YouTube. They get special perks and benefits from YouTube, despite the fact that they're putting out this trash. But there are some things that I want to go over because it's incredibly important. First and foremost is TYT bringing up how the right wing actually has all the groomers, and look at the Catholic Church, look at all the abuses there, stop talking about the public schools versus the Catholic Church. But the thing is, we actually have numbers on this. We actually have something to compare the two. And what we find out when we compare the Catholic Church and their historic problems with underage boys to the public school system is that the public school system is significantly more likely to house abusers than the Catholic Church. And that leads us to wonder why we don't talk about what goes on in the public school system. And the reason why we don't discuss this is because the public school system does not have the same veneer of sanctity that the Catholic Church has. Remember, the Catholic Church is a religious institution. They often preach about morality, including sexual morality. Therefore, when they are violating that sexual morality in their own ranks, and it becomes a huge problem that they're covering up, this has the stain of going against their own values, so there's a hypocrisy point of view, and thus the Catholic Church gets significantly more attention. On top of that, you also have the major issue of the Catholic Church appearing to be a right-wing institution. You have a heavily biased left-wing media like the Young Turks, so obviously they're going to emphasize and re-emphasize those points because you get to go after a religious institution, which is considered by them to be a right-wing institution, in multiple different ways and smear them and drag them through the mud now and through the end of time. And to be fair, the Catholic Church does deserve some scorn. What they did was horrible. The cover-up was actually worse than the crimes because the crimes, you could say, are individual actors. And if the Catholic Church was living up to their values, they would actually punish the priests that were the problems, the people that were in a position of trust, rather than moving them around and all the other issues associated with that story that I'm sure you guys have heard a lot about. But the point being is that the public schools have way more offenders, way more instances of problems with kids, and unlike the Catholic Church, because it was Catholic priests and young boys for the most part, they don't get that level of scorn. I mean, how many stories have we seen of hot 20-something teachers that are sleeping with their students and everybody treats it as A-okay because it's really not that big of a deal? You could even go lower in terms of the age of the student. Because the teacher looks attractive, people will say, nice, good job, kid. And honestly, I'm among those people who makes those jokes when that happens. But if it was a man with a female student or a man with a male student, which happens a lot in public schools, then all of a sudden that's a problem. So we are already looking at the problem of the public schools in terms of a completely different lens than the Catholic Church. And the problem is much more significant. And we don't talk about the teachers' unions, which protect teachers that have these sorts of problems. There was actually a teacher in a school that I went to who years later got in trouble for this. And even though they had overwhelming evidence, daily phone calls, hundreds of thousands of text messages, all manner of proof. What ultimately ended up happening was they paid the teacher because the teacher was accused, and the teachers union has crafted such a crazy due process that it's impossible to end up hurting a teacher in any way, shape, or form. You can't fire him. So he ended up getting a settlement, got his pension, all that nonsense, and then it came out years later when he broke up with the student that he was hooking up with for years that no, this relationship actually did happen, and he was still not prosecuted for that crime. Now, to be clear, that is an anecdote. That's a single individual personal story, but this is also something that is institutionalized in the city of New York, which is one of the largest school districts, if not the largest school district in the entire country. We have something called the rubber room, which is when teachers get in trouble and you can't have them in the classroom, but they're going through the lengthy unionized appeal process in order to get a settlement from the school, even though they were the ones at fault. They go into this room and sit there to collect their paycheck for the entirety of their workday.
See, when you surround yourself with people who fearmonger about educators and the LGBTQ community simultaneously, all of a sudden you believe all these little fantasy stories about teacher, like the prevalence of teachers serving as groomers within the public education system, because that's exactly what happens. All those powerful teachers, all that good pay, all those benefits they get, they're so powerful. They use their position of power to groom kids.
So Anna's mocking and faux sarcastic tone comes out of a position of pure, unfiltered ignorance. I showed you the headline of this article before, but there's a reason I did so, because we're going to delve into it, because Anna is pushing the myth that teachers are underpaid and they have no power, and what do you mean even teachers are doing anything bad even, and institutions to protect them? That's absurd.
Those powerful teachers, all that good pay, all those benefits they get, they're so powerful. They use their position of power to groom kids.
Well, what we're going to talk about is a case where a music teacher in 1998 and 1999 was accused of repeatedly harassing and touching female students in a public school. Now, you might be saying, Sean, what are you doing? Why are you talking about this guy who in 1998, 1999 did these things or was accused of these things? Well, the reason why I'm talking about him is because he's still getting paid by New York City. And not only is he still getting paid by New York City, but his pay has risen every single year with the newly negotiated contract. So originally, when he was actually teaching back in 1998, he was making $39,239. Now, not teaching for 20 years, he's been in the rubber room for 20 years, he's pulling in $132,753. So this guy's making $130.
Those powerful teachers, all that good pay, all those benefits they get, they're so powerful.
So Anna, you can make your stupid faces and do your sarcastic tone about how teachers have no power in the political system. When this guy hit tenure in the rubber room, they didn't fire him, they put him in the rubber room, left him in there so long that he hit tenure, and now he's pulling in $132,000 every single year to not teach. Not to mention, you go to the rubber room for your regular school day hours. And one of the things people don't tell you when they're talking about the low teacher pay is that the school year is only 181 days out of the year, meaning he's not working half the year and he's pulling in $130.
All that good pay, all those benefits they get, they're so powerful.
And by the way, I'm using the term working half the year very loosely because, again, he's in the rubber room for sexually assaulting kids and he's been there for 20 years. He just has to show up and sit in the room for the same amount of time that he would be sitting in a classroom, which he's not in because, again, he's been in the rubber room awaiting discipline for 20 years.
All that good pay, all those benefits they get, they're so powerful.
And he's not the only one, by the way. There's another teacher right in the next paragraph in this article who's been in there since 2002, and his pay has risen to $127,000. That's what he's pulling in as of right now, almost 20 years in the rubber room. And there's multiple other instances in here, people pulling in 130 grand, all of this money because the public school system institutionally protects these bad teachers. That's what the teachers union does with their political power that Anna Kasparian is denying exists.
All that good pay, all those benefits they get, they're so powerful.
Teachers in New York City are getting paid hundreds of millions of dollars total to sit in rooms and not teach because they're on probation from teaching, for various instances in the class, which can range from violence against the kids, it can range from sexual misconduct against the kids, and all these other problems. Because the process for firing a teacher is nearly impossible, everything is stacked in their favor because teachers' unions are heavy political contributors that ultimately end up buying off the system, much in the way that Cenk talks about the bankers in this very clip.
Oh, the teachers are bad. I told you they were going to do a war on teachers. They are. Everything's being blamed on the teachers, not the bankers, not the oil executives, not all those guys who are funneling tons and tons of bribes to our politician. But the real problem in the country is teachers.
Yes, Cenk, the teachers union, because everybody doesn't like the banks. Everybody doesn't like the banker bailouts. Everybody doesn't like corporate favoritism with the banks. But the thing is that banks have competition. So banks can outperform other banks. That's the thing that can happen. There's still some market principles in banking in the United States, however limited by the government that they actually are. But the public school teachers unions have overwhelming power over the school districts. Again, they help elect through campaign donations, and because they're a big organization, the politicians that they ultimately end up negotiating against. Very famously, Jon Corzine, when he had to cut the budget of everything in the state of New Jersey due to the fact that New Jersey was running out of money during the 2008 financial crisis, kept increasing the budget for education in his state. And he pitched this as something that he was doing to invest in the future of the state of New Jersey. But in reality, part of this was because Jon Corzine was negotiating against the teachers union, and of course was a giant political contributor. If you look at the biggest line item in almost any state in the union, you will find out that it's education, which means that every state in the union, for the most part, some have right to work states and all that, has a huge teachers union that is the biggest financial constituent group, because the money that is being doled out the most is going to have the most lobbyists and the most people seeking that money. So everything that was true, and some would argue is true, about the Catholic Church and their desire to hide predators, how institutionalized it was, is more true of the public schools, because the public schools are tied into the local governments, where, by the way, all these crimes fall under the jurisdiction of, for the most part. And the media's on the side of the teachers' unions, and there's no sanctity, so there's no real element of hypocrisy to go after. This is why, instead of isolated incidents, even though you have teachers' union negotiated due process policies that protect these teachers and end up moving them to other schools, we get none of the same scorn that we get when we talk about priests, because priests, again, have the element of sanctity, and teachers are backed up and portrayed as these perpetual victims in our society.
Now, are you really concerned about the kids, or are you more concerned about smearing LGBTQ people and going, oh, it's the gay people that are doing it, even though it's a goddamn lie? You're a hateful person, and you've always hated the trans community. Now you spread your hate to more, and you put out the poison every day, and now smearing all of them as groomers. You disgust me.
Now, the next thing that shows you that Cenk is completely unhinged, has no argument, and is just in smear mode is that he's doing the same exact smear tactic that he used against Sam Harris. If you remember that whole debacle with Sam Harris, Ben Affleck on the Bill Maher show related to Islam, Sam Harris gave very specific percentages based on polling about which Muslims believe these radical ideas. He even went country by country to explain how there is actually a big problem in the Islamic world with these radical ideas, or ideas that the West would consider radical ideas, because in reality, in the Islamic world, they are the normal ideas. Cenk, during that point, couldn't argue against the polling, so he said, just like many people in the left-wing media, that Sam Harris was smearing all Muslims. He kept saying all, even though Sam Harris was giving specific percentages, breaking them down by country. It didn't matter. Just say he's saying all Muslims, so that way you could call him Islamophobic and a racist. Same trick that he's doing right here when he says Joe Rogan is saying all the LGBTs.
They said not all teachers are groomers, but a lot of groomers are teachers.
There you go.
And that's real. Constantly, teachers are getting arrested for exposing themselves to children, for masturbating in front of children, for sending nude pictures in front of children. Every couple days there's a new one that pops up in the news. And how many of those people haven't been caught yet? And how many of those people are out there? And how many of those people are doing it under the guise of I'm an LGBTQ educator?
Now, what Rogan said, and the Young Turks played the video themselves, was that this happens a lot in the public schools. It's very prevalent in the public schools. We went over that earlier in this video where I explained find that it's actually more prevalent in the public schools than it is among the Catholic Church. Now, I have to see a per capita breakdown on that. If I do find it, I will put it on screen, but overall, very prevalent, but it doesn't get the attention. And then he said some of these people use their LGBT status as an excuse or as a cover to get away with this, which is undeniably true. So what the Young Turks did, because they're lazy and because they don't care about the facts, they have a personal vendetta against Joe Rogan since he won't let them back on the podcast, is use a 60-second clip that was available and circulating on Twitter. They didn't bother to look up the additional context. They didn't care about the additional context because they don't care about the truth. But Joe Rogan is the most listened to podcast in the United States of America. He has a way larger audience than the Young Turks. So what the Young Turks are also doing by not playing you the additional context as audience members of the Young Turks is calling you stupid because they think you'll never come into contact with the full information and you're too lazy to look it up for yourself. And when we find the full context, which I'll play for you right now, you'll notice something a little bit different.
Every couple of days there's a new one that pops up in the news. And how many of those people haven't been caught yet? And how many of those people are out there? And how many of those people are doing it under the guise of I'm an LGBTQ educator, under the guise of I'm an LGBTQ educator, and
I'm keeping a tally of the amount of hate mail that you're going to be getting.
Well, good luck. I don't read it. There's people that are good people in all walks of life. Trans people, gay people, straight people, bisexual, whatever the fuck you are. There's good people in all walks of life. There's also pieces of shit that will use those labels in order to get closer to groups of people and indoctrinate them.
You've always hated the trans community. Now you spread your hate to more. And you put out the poison every day. And now smearing all of them as groomers. You disgust me.
So obviously, if you didn't figure it out for yourself, Rogan was definitely not saying all LGBT people are groomers. That's ridiculous and absurd. Rogan was saying there's good people, and he went out of his way to say there's good people of all sexual orientations, all gender identities, all of that. What he was saying is that there's also bad people, that being in this protected group doesn't make you an automatic saint, perfect person, or anything like that. And the idea that it does is the veneer that prevents people from actually looking into the issue at hand. Now, Rogan isn't giving the same percentages as Sam Harris. He's not as detailed as Sam Harris, but you can clearly tell he's specifically saying not all of them. He's saying some of them, some.
That's the kind of monsters these people are. But then you get to the LGBTQ community and he's like, oh, you think it doesn't happen? These guys, they do all these things like masturbating in front of the students, and they do it under the guise of being LGBTQ. Do they, Joe? Do they? Show me one story where that happened. Where a teacher masturbated in front of the class, and they said, it's okay, I'm LGBTQ, and then they weren't fired. Everyone's like, oh, it's okay, he's LGBTQ. Show me one story.
Now, the next thing that Cenk does, and I want to take note of, is he changes up a story about a teacher related to masturbation and young kids and all that, and he says, if you want to prove that this happened, you have to show me the teacher that was masturbating in front of the kids and then didn't get fired because they're LGBTQ. And if you press Rogan on that, he would likely say that didn't happen. Now, what Rogan would say, and what Rogan was referencing, was a situation that actually occurred in a private school in New York, where a first grade teacher was introducing children to masturbation through sex ed that is apparently taught to first graders.
Hey, how come my penis gets big sometimes and points up in the air?
That's called an erection.
Sometimes I touch my penis because it feels good.
Sometimes when I'm in my bath or when Mom puts me to bed, I like to touch my vulva too.
You have a clitoris there, Kayla, that probably feels good to touch the same way Keith's penis feels good when he touches it. But have you ever noticed that older kids and grown-ups don't touch their private parts in public?
They don't?
That's right, Keith. It's okay to touch yourself and see how different body parts feel, but it's best to only do it in private.
And this was done through this cartoon on the subject matter, which clearly shows it was aimed at children. Now, incorporated with that very weird cartoon were lessons on gender identity and other LGBT stuff, so the teacher was actually associating and using LGBT stuff as a mechanism to teach these first graders about masturbation. That did happen. The teacher wasn't even fired. The teacher just resigned. And we come to find out a little bit later that at another prep school, at another lesson led by this teacher, so this happened before, it's a pattern of behavior, This teacher was teaching the students about porn literacy, about BDSM, about OnlyFans. Again, this is what people mean when they're concerned about grooming in the schools. The fact that this was allowed to go on in one school, then she left that school for whatever reason, moves to a new school, and then she's not even fired for that. There's not even a real investigation. She's just allowed to resign. It's a weird teacher, and she's like, look, it's important to teach kids about LGBT stuff. Again, being linked by her, the left winger, not being linked by people on the right wing. It's just the right wing pointing this out, showing this pattern occurs, and then Cenk getting mad and trying to label everybody groomers so that way he can get rid of the term because it's an effective weapon and education is an effective issue to use against the left wing. Now, there's another example of this phenomenon that I actually heard on a recent Lauren Chen video, which, by the way, everybody should go congratulate Lauren Chen on the birth of her first child. Mazel tov, praise, all that nonsense, give it to her, be polite, be courteous. But this specific example had to do with a teacher that had an assignment where she told the students about her sexuality, which of course was pansexual, which is activist speak for bisexual. You ever notice how certain gender identities and certain sexualities were covered by other words, but the specific word that people use tend to lean toward their activism? And I know somebody's going to tell me the difference between a pan and a bi in the description of this video or in the comments of this video. You're not going to tell me in the description because you're not allowed to write in my description of the video. But honestly, I respect that difference completely because this is a super progressive channel, and I of course acknowledge that. But just for argument's sake, I'm going to say it's activist related and there is no difference because there is no difference. Just kidding, there is a difference, super progressive. YouTube, don't strike me down. Anyway, in this story, after this teacher revealed her sexuality to her students, she then gave them an art project where she asked them all their sexuality and made them paint the corresponding LGBT related flags to those sexualities. And what I find really interesting about this is that a lot of people are like, oh, well, this teacher got dismissed or forced to resign or whatever the ultimate outcome was. They're not at the school anymore. And this is just proof of how bad the right wing is, blah, 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 all that nonsense. But the thing is, if you worked at a business and your employer came up to you randomly, told you their sexuality and then asked for your sexuality and then told you to draw something for them based on your sexuality, that would be the greatest case of sexual harassment ever. And in that instance, we're talking about adults. In that instance, we're talking about a voluntary relationship between employer and employee. The employee is not captive in that scenario, despite what the commie losers would tell you. But the students in these schools are required to go to the schools. You can't just walk out of a classroom if you don't like what's being taught when you're at that age. And yet, for some reason, the people on the left will say, good, sue the employer. He's a sexual harasser. What a stinky pervert loser jerkface. But the teacher, totally fine, super progressive, even though it's middle schoolers, even though the teacher's clearly in a position of power, even though it's clearly a captive audience. That's totally amazing, and I support that. And it's so stunning and brave for her to reveal her sexuality to those kids, and wow, and demand their sexuality and then make them do an assignment based on that. Just so amazing. And that's really one of the most absurd things about the view from the left of American society. We should treat adults like children. They can't have any input in what their kids learn. They can't be trusted in terms of work situations. Anything is sexual harassment and suable, but we treat children like adults. We give them all this information. We allow teachers, who again hold them captive, they're the captive audience, to do things that no employer would be able to do without being sued into oblivion. It's crazy, and despite Cenk's attempts to blackmail his political opposition, which him and Anna I guess have in common now, it's not going to deter anybody who's honest from talking about it. We see these stories, we see them coming out. Sure, there's some exaggerated ones here and there, and honestly, as people on the right, we should be more honest when stories are presented to us and they're not really anything, or they turn out to be hoaxes later on. We shouldn't bite on anything without confirmation. But the real stories are definitely out there. The statistical evidence on where the abuse is happening is definitely out there. We're not going to ignore it just because Cenk yells into the camera and he's trying to flip the term and attack everybody. We're not going to deny it because of Anna Kasparian's Valley Girl sarcastic tone.
Okay, Joe, let me help you out, okay? Joe, I suspect you're a groomer. I've seen your stand-up. I've seen your specials. You make some jokes I don't like. And so I think you might be a groomer. Let's start a hashtag. Is Joe Rogan a groomer? Groomer, I think you're a groomer. What? You don't like that? You want me to stop calling you a groomer?
Anyway, those are just my thoughts. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. If you like this video, you can show them by leaving a like. You can subscribe for more content. Follow me on all my social medias. You can support me via the support links in the description box. This has been me talking about the Young Turks, trying to blackmail Rogan and melting down yet again. Till next time.